Before the cinematic universes, before billion-dollar franchises took over the world, there was a different era. An era where superhero stories experimented, took risks, and sometimes disappeared before anyone realized what they had lost. These were not just cartoons. They were blueprints, warnings, and hidden masterpieces that shaped the genre in silence. Some challenged identity, some predicted the future, others simply dared to be different. And today, we are bringing them back into the spotlight. Number 15. The Zeta Project, 2001 to 2002. There was no cape, no dramatic skyline leap, no iconic symbol burned into the sky. What existed instead was a machine that refused to kill. The Zeta Project arrived quietly and vanished even faster, yet it carried one of the most unsettling ideas of the 2000s. And a weapon designed for assassination suddenly develops a conscience and chooses to run. Zeta was not your traditional hero. He did not punch villains or deliver speeches about justice. He hid, he adapted, he questioned his own existence while being hunted by the very system that created him. This made every episode feel less like a superhero story and more like a fugitive thriller wrapped in philosophical tension. The world around him treated him as property, not life. That conflict gave the show an emotional edge that most mainstream cartoons avoided. What made this series unforgettable for those who saw it was its quiet rebellion against expectations. It asked whether a machine could possess morality stronger than humans. It explored identity without spectacle. Even its connection to Batman Beyond felt distant, almost like a shadow that never fully crossed over. And that might explain why it faded. It was too introspective, too different, too unwilling to play by superhero rules. But in hindsight, that is exactly what makes it worth rediscovering. Zeta was not trying to save the world. He was trying to understand it. Number 14. Static Shock, 2000 to 2004. A bolt of electricity changed everything, and yet the world somehow forgot how powerful that moment really was. Static Shock was not just another superhero cartoon. It was a cultural statement hiding inside a Saturday morning time slot. Virgil Hawkins was not born into greatness. He was a normal teenager caught in the wrong place during a gang conflict that spiraled into a chemical disaster. When he emerged with electric powers, the story did not turn into fantasy escapism. It became grounded, real, uncomfortable at times. This show tackled issues most superhero cartoons avoided completely: racism, gun violence, homelessness, bullying. It did not soften these themes or hide behind humor. Instead, it placed a young black hero at the center of them and allowed him to struggle in ways that felt human rather than heroic. That authenticity gave the series a weight that few animated shows of its era could match. What makes its disappearance so strange is how ahead of its time it was. Crossovers with major DC heroes existed, yet the spotlight remained firmly on Virgil. He was not a side character. He was the future. And yet, as superhero media exploded in the 2000s, Static Shock was left behind. On no major revival, no cinematic push, no consistent presence. Just memories of a show that quietly did everything right before the world was ready to notice. Number 13. X-Men Evolution, 2000 to 2003. Most people remember the X-Men as fully formed legends, already burdened by history, already locked into endless conflict. X-Men. Evolution did something far more dangerous. It stripped them down and forced them to grow up in front of you. This was not a team of polished heroes. These were teenagers dealing with powers they barely understood while trying to survive school life social pressure and fear of being exposed. That shift changed everything. Suddenly, mutants were not symbols. They were kids who could lose control at any moment. Every hallway became a battlefield. Every secret felt like it could destroy them. The genius of the show lived in its patience. It did not rush into global threats or massive destruction. It built relationships slowly. Rivalries simmered. Friendships fractured. The Brotherhood was not just evil. They were broken reflections of the same struggle. Even iconic characters like Wolverine felt grounded, not mythic. And then when the show finally escalated into larger conflicts, it hit harder because you had watched these characters earn their place. The transformation from uncertain teenagers to real heroes felt organic. Real growth replaced instant greatness. Yet, despite this bold reinvention, the series often lives in the shadow of the 90s X-Men cartoon. That is a mistake. Evolution was not trying to repeat history. It was rewriting the foundation. And for those who revisit it now, it feels less like nostalgia and more like a blueprint modern superhero stories still struggle to match. Number 12. Spider-Man Unlimited, 1999 to 2001. This is where Spider-Man stopped feeling familiar and started feeling like a fever dream. Spider-Man Unlimited took one of the most recognizable heroes ever created and threw him into a world that barely resembled anything fans expected. Instead of New York streets and grounded crime stories, Peter Parker found himself stranded on a distant counter-Earth ruled by a society of evolved beasts. Humans were second-class citizens. Power belonged to something unnatural, and Spider-Man was no longer just a friendly neighborhood hero. He was an outsider fighting a system he did not understand. The tone was darker, more experimental, and at times strangely unsettling. Themes of oppression, identity, and rebellion replaced the usual superhero formula. Even the suit changed into something more futuristic, almost alien, which only added to the feeling that this version of Spider-Man was disconnected from everything familiar. That boldness became both its strength and its downfall. Fans expecting classic Spider-Man struggled with the shift. The show ended abruptly, leaving its story unresolved, almost like it vanished mid-sentence. But looking back now, that risk feels refreshing. It dared to ask what happens when you remove a hero from everything that defines them. No support system, no comfort, no normal life. Just survival in a world that does not want you there. And that question still lingers because Spider-Man Unlimited never got the chance to answer it. Number 11. The Spectacular Spider-Man, 2008 to 2009. Some shows do everything right and still disappear. The Spectacular Spider-Man is one of those rare cases where quality was not the problem. Timing was. This version of Peter Parker understood something most adaptations struggle with. Being Spider-Man is not about power. It is about pressure. Every decision costs something. Every victory creates a new problem. And this series built its entire identity around that tension. The storytelling was tight, almost surgical. Villains were not random threats. They were part of a growing web of consequences. One action led to another. Characters evolved naturally. Relationships shifted with purpose. Even secondary figures felt important because everything connected. Peter himself was not perfect. He made mistakes. He lost people. He struggled to balance his double life in ways that felt painfully real. That grounded approach made every moment hit harder. When things went wrong, they did not reset. They stayed with him. Visually, the show avoided flashy trends and instead leaned into clarity and movement. Fights were fast but readable, emotions were clear. It trusted its writing more than spectacle. So why did it end so quickly? Rights issues, corporate reshuffling, external decisions that had nothing to do with the quality on screen. And that is the tragedy. This was not just another Spider-Man cartoon. It was arguably the most complete version of the character ever animated. A show that understood the hero completely and still got cut before it could finish its story. Number 10. Wolverine and the X-Men, 2009. When everything collapses, who leads what is left behind? Wolverine and the X-Men begins with that question and never lets go. The X-Men are gone. The school is destroyed. Professor X has vanished. The dream is broken before the story even begins. What remains is Wolverine, a character not known for leadership, forced into a role he never wanted. That shift changes the tone immediately. This is not a hopeful team story. It is a reconstruction, a slow, painful attempt to bring something back from ruin. Each member carries damage. Each reunion feels uncertain. Trust is not guaranteed. The show thrives on its serialized structure. Events matter. Choices echo forward. And there is a sense that the future is already collapsing and the present is trying to catch up. The looming threat of a dystopian timeline adds urgency without overwhelming the character work. Wolverine himself is portrayed differently here. Less lone warrior, more reluctant protector. His struggle is not about fighting enemies. It is about holding a broken team together long enough to matter again. Despite its strong narrative, the series lasted only one season. Plans for continuation existed, but never materialized. That unfinished feeling lingers, not as frustration, but as potential. Because what this show started was something deeper than a typical superhero arc. It was about rebuilding hope after it has already been lost. Number 9. Fantastic Four World's Greatest Heroes, 2006 to 2007. It had the name. It had the legacy, but somehow it slipped through the cracks without anyone noticing. Fantastic Four World's Greatest Heroes tried to modernize Marvel's first family at a time when superhero animation was already overcrowded. Instead of leaning into heavy continuity or dark storytelling, the show embraced energy. Fast pacing, stylized visuals, clean episodic adventures that felt almost like comic book issues brought to life. That approach made it accessible, but also easy to overlook in an era chasing complexity. Each member of the team was clearly defined. Reed was the mind always calculating. Sue was the emotional core, holding everything together. Johnny brought chaos and ego. Ben carried the weight of transformation. Their dynamic worked not because it was dramatic, but because it felt functional. And like a family that had already survived its worst days. The villains were equally vibrant. Dr. Doom stood out not just as a threat, but as a constant presence. Not overwhelming, but always looming. The show understood that stakes do not always require destruction. Sometimes personality is enough, yet timing worked against it. The live-action films created confusion about tone and identity. Audiences were unsure which version to invest in. What remains now is a series that feels lighter than its peers, but not weaker. It knew exactly what it wanted to be. A clean, confident superhero adventure that did not need to prove anything. And maybe that quiet confidence is why it was forgotten. Number 8. Legion of Superheroes, 2006 to 2008. The future should have made them unforgettable, and instead it erased them from memory. Legion of Superheroes took the concept of superheroes and pushed it centuries ahead, where legends become lessons and myths become training material. This was not just another team. It was a legacy in motion. A group of young heroes inspired by stories of Superman trying to live up to something that already feels impossible. That pressure defined the series. Every mission was not just about survival. It was about proving they deserved to exist in that legacy. The inclusion of a young Superman changed the balance. Instead of being the ultimate savior, he became a student. Learning, failing, growing alongside others who were supposed to look up to him. That inversion created tension that most DC shows never attempted. The world building was expansive, different planets, different cultures. On a universe that felt alive beyond the main story. It trusted the audience to keep up instead of simplifying everything. But that ambition may have worked against it. It demanded attention in a time when audiences expected simplicity. It built a future that felt distant rather than familiar. Looking back now, it feels ahead of its time. A superhero series not about icons, but about what comes after them. And maybe that is why it faded, because it was never about the present. It was always about what the future might forget. Number 7. The Batman, 2004 to 2008. Reinvention is risky, especially when the character is already iconic. The Batman walked straight into that risk and refused to play it safe. At first glance, everything felt wrong. The designs were sharper, more exaggerated. The tone was lighter in places. Even Batman himself seemed younger, less experienced, less mythic. Fans who grew up with earlier versions resisted immediately. This did not feel like the Dark Knight they knew, but that surface reaction hides what the show was actually doing. It was rebuilding Batman from the ground up, not as a finished legend, but as a work in progress. This version was still learning, still adapting, still making mistakes. That vulnerability changed the entire dynamic. Villains were reimagined in bold ways. Joker became unpredictable in a different way. Penguin transformed into something more aggressive. Even familiar faces felt unfamiliar, which forced the audience to engage again instead of relying on memory. As the seasons progressed, the show evolved. It grew darker, more confident, more connected to the larger DC universe. Our crossovers began to appear, but they never overshadowed Batman himself. This was still his journey, his growth. And that might be why it deserves more respect than it gets. It did not try to copy what worked before. It tried to become something new. In a world filled with safe adaptations, the Batman chose risk, and while that risk cost it immediate acceptance, it gave the series something more valuable over time. Identity. Number 6. Batman Beyond, 1999 to 2001. The future of Gotham should have guaranteed immortality. Instead, it became a memory that quietly faded. Batman Beyond was not just a continuation, it was a transformation. Bruce Wayne was no longer the one in the suit. Age had slowed him down. The city had changed. Crime had evolved into something colder, more technological, more distant. And into that world stepped Terry McGinnis, a teenager who was never meant to carry the symbol. What made this show powerful was not just the concept, but the contrast. Old Batman versus new world. Experience versus instinct. Bruce became the mentor, guiding from the shadows, while Terry struggled to live up to a legacy he barely understood. The tone was darker than expected. Isolation was constant. Gotham felt larger, more dangerous, less human. Even victories carried a sense of distance. This was not a hopeful future. It was a warning about what happens when time moves on without you. The series ended before it could fully explore everything it set up. Yet its influence remained hidden, shaping how future adaptations approached legacy characters. Today, it stands as one of the boldest experiments in superhero storytelling. And a reminder that sometimes the most powerful stories are not about heroes at their peak, but about what happens when they are forced to pass the mantle. Number 5. Iron Man Armored Adventures, 2009 to 2012. Reinvention can either dilute a character or expose something new. Iron Man Armored Adventures chose the second path and quietly built a version of Tony Stark most audiences never expected. Instead of a billionaire already shaped by life, this series introduced a teenage Tony still figuring out who he was. The armor was not just a weapon, it was a shield against a world that suddenly became hostile after the loss of his father. That shift turned the story into something more personal. Less about heroics, more about survival and growth. The tone balanced technology with emotion. Every upgrade felt earned. Every battle carried consequences that affected Tony's identity. He was not perfect. He was reckless, curious, and often overwhelmed. That made his journey feel human rather than heroic. What made the show stand out was its willingness to build long arcs. Villains were not one-time threats. They evolved, relationships shifted, secrets unfolded, slowly creating a sense that everything was connected beneath the surface. Unfortunately, timing worked against it. The rise of the Marvel Cinematic Universe pulled attention toward a different version of Iron Man, one that was louder, more polished, more widely accepted. But beneath that shadow, this series offered something unique, a character study disguised as a superhero show. A reminder that even the most iconic heroes start as uncertain individuals trying to understand their place in a world that keeps changing around them. Number 4. Super Robot Monkey Team, Hyperforce Go, 2004 to 2006. The title sounds chaotic, and that is exactly the point. Super Robot Monkey Team, Hyperforce Go, did not follow traditional superhero rules. It created its own identity somewhere between science fiction, anime influence, and pure superhero energy. At the center was a young boy pulled into a cosmic war far beyond his understanding. Suddenly, he was leading a team of robotic warriors against a force that threatened entire worlds. That scale gave the series a sense of urgency rarely seen in similar shows. What made it work was the contrast. Bright visuals and energetic action hit a surprisingly dark core. Loss was real. Danger was constant. The villains were not just obstacles. They were overwhelming forces that made victory feel uncertain. The team dynamic carried the emotional weight. Each robotic member had a personality, a purpose, a history that slowly unfolded. They were not just machines. They were characters struggling with their own roles in a war that never seemed to end. Despite its originality, the show struggled to find a lasting audience. Its hybrid style confused viewers who expected something more traditional. It did not fit neatly into one category, and that made it easy to overlook. But that same uniqueness is what makes it stand out today. It was not trying to copy anything. It was building something entirely different, on a superhero story that embraced chaos and turned it into identity. Number 3. Danny Phantom, 2004 to 2007. He was not bitten by anything. He was not chosen by destiny. He was an accident that should not have survived. Danny Phantom begins with a mistake and turns it into a double life that constantly threatens to collapse. Danny Fenton is a normal teenager until a portal to the ghost zone changes everything. One moment, he is invisible to the world. The next, he becomes something the world fears. Half human, half ghost. Never fully accepted by either side. That tension becomes the core of the show. What separates this series from typical superhero stories is its identity conflict. Danny is not just hiding powers, he is hiding existence itself. Every transformation feels like a risk. Every battle risks exposure. The stakes are not just about defeating villains, they are about staying normal in a life that refuses to remain stable. The tone shifts effortlessly. Humor sits next to isolation. Action collides with quiet moments of fear. Villains are not always grand threats. Sometimes they are reflections of what Danny could become if he loses control. That psychological layer gives the show depth beyond its colorful surface. Despite its strong fan base, the series faded without the recognition it deserved. It never fully crossed into mainstream superhero discussions, even though it carried all the elements: power, conflict, sacrifice. Looking back now, it feels like a hidden cornerstone of 2000s animation, a story about becoming something powerful while fearing what that power might take away from you. Number 2. Mega Man NT Warrior, 2002 to 2005. The battlefield was not physical. It was digital and invisible and everywhere at once. Mega Man NT Warrior redefined what a superhero world could look like by shifting the fight into network systems and data itself. Lan Hikari is not a traditional hero. He does not wear a suit or leap across rooftops. Instead, he operates through Mega Man, a digital entity that exists inside the Internet. Together, they form a partnership that blurs the line between human and program. One controls the real world. The other protects the virtual one. This concept allowed the show to explore threats that felt ahead of its time. Cyber-terrorism system, takeovers, artificial intelligence rebellion. These were not distant ideas. They were early warnings of a world becoming increasingly dependent on technology. What made the series compelling was its structure. Every mission felt like a puzzle. Every enemy required strategy, not just strength. The connection between Lan and Mega Man carried emotional weight because their bond was built on trust rather than power. Yet despite its innovation, the show rarely appears in Western superhero discussions. It existed in a space that many overlooked simply because it did not follow familiar rules. Now it feels prophetic. A superhero story set inside the very systems modern life depends on. A reminder that the future of heroism may not wear a cape. It may exist where we cannot even see it. Number 1. The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, 2002 to 2006. He did not wear a mask. He did not protect a city from the shadows, and yet he may have been one of the most overlooked superheroes of the 2000s. The Adventures of Jimmy Neutron Boy. Genius hides its true identity behind humor, but underneath that surface lies a classic hero framework built on intelligence instead of strength. Jimmy is not just a genius. He is a problem creator and a problem solver trapped in the same mind. Every invention begins with curiosity and ends with chaos. Towns freeze, aliens invade, reality bends, and every time the responsibility falls back on him to fix what he unleashed. That cycle mirrors the very essence of superhero storytelling. Power without control, followed by consequences that demand growth. What makes this series stand out is its unpredictability. Threats do not follow a pattern. One episode deals with interdimensional danger. Another explores personal failure. The stakes shift constantly, which keeps the world unstable and alive. Jimmy is never fully in control, and that vulnerability defines his journey. The supporting cast grounds the chaos. Friends question him, challenge him, sometimes even become victims of his decisions. This prevents the show from becoming a simple power fantasy. It becomes a story about accountability. Despite its popularity during its run, it is rarely remembered as a superhero show. That perception hides what it truly was, a story about intellect as power and responsibility as its cost. A hero who saves the day not by fighting harder, but by thinking faster. These forgotten shows were never failures, they were simply ahead of their time. Hidden between trends and overshadowed by giants, they quietly redefined what superhero stories could be. If even one of these surprised you, then the mission worked. Now the real question is which one deserves a comeback first.